Welcome to Adventures in Coffee, a podcast by Caffeine magazine, sponsored by Oatly and iThinker.
Yes, in this 6-episode series, Jools and I are exploring the world of coffee for those that, maybe a bit curious about what goes into your daily cup.
Now, we're all becoming more and more invested in where our food and drink comes from. So, we made this podcast to try and demystify the complicated world of coffee and definitely try and have a laugh along the way.
We're all going to get in our virtual jetliners, which don't exist. We're going to go around the world and speak to some experts and answer those questions that you and I have always wanted to ask.
Now, I'm Jules Walker, a very proud East Londoner, a cycling advocate who's been around for some time, and your very everyday coffee lover.
You are the least East End woman I know. It's so posh. I am Scott Bentley. I'm the founder of Caffeine magazine. I've been told by many people that I'm a bit of a coffee nerd.
Now, in today's episode, we're going to talk about how to be more environmentally conscious with our coffee choices.
Oh, Jules, this is going to be boring. No,
it's not going to be boring at all.
Yeah, we all know this stuff can come across sometimes as maybe a bit dense, boring, or even really important, but it may not need to be that way. It can be a bit simpler.
The idea for this episode came from a little debate that we had the other day when it comes to coffee cups. Maybe we should discuss that.
Yeah, Jules, so I just gone to a cafe. I was talking to you about this great coffee that I just had, and you asked me, did I have a reusable cup? And I rather guiltily said, no, it was in a disposable cup because I'd forgotten it, left it in the dishwasher. And you, let's say, berated me quite heavily for it. Now, before we get into this, I got this feeling that by using this disposable cup, you were putting the world's woes on my shoulders. It was like, this cup that I'd used was going to get thrown on a truck. It's going to fall off, go down a river somewhere, and some poor penguin was going to get this stuck in his throat, and I would be responsible for the death of a penguin.
Well, we were both pretty surprised at how emotional we got, but it did get us thinking. What is actually the best way to be environmentally conscious with our coffee choices? I mean, there's that whole issue of how bad is a disposable cup? Is it really that terrible? What if that whole thing is actually just a massive red herring?
I think for me, what we need to understand are what makes a big difference and what makes a small difference. And understanding those things means that we can focus on those things that make the biggest difference.
Exactly. But in all of this, the first question that we should be asking is, what are we actually measuring here? I mean, should we be discussing like carbon footprint? Are we discussing the issue of landfill here? Is this coming down to marine pollution, taking us back to those poor penguins again? I mean, how do we actually begin to frame this whole conversation?
I think this is a good time to cut to a conversation that I had with Tim Ridley from United Baristas. He's someone that's written about ecology issues for a long time and probably has the best understanding of anyone that I know of these issues.
But before we get to that conversation, Scott, let's have a word from our sponsors.
Jules, we should really talk about greenwashing. What does it actually mean?
Well, greenwashing is making unsubstantiated environmental claims, isn't it?
Absolutely. I'm not saying them false claims. They're just claims that can't be verified. And I know that greenwashing does happen quite a lot in coffee.
Yeah, but it's not just environmental claims, is it? I mean, roasters say all the time that they pay their farmers well, but who's actually checked it? And how well is well?
Of course. I mean, a roaster can solve this, though, by getting their coffee, I think, verified.
So if you want truly transparent coffee, ask your roaster to get their coffee, I think, verified.
Scott, hey, how are you? What's happening?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. I'm all right. So as I mentioned in my email, Jules and I are exploring the ecological impact of our coffee choices. Now, you have a website called United Baristas that does many things for the barista community, including like a marketplace where people can sell coffee-related goods. But one of the things on there is a section of your blog where you look at the environmental impact of our coffee. So can you quickly fill in our listener on that?
It seemed only natural several years ago to start thinking about actually what is coffee's carbon footprint and how can we reduce it? And basically I just read a whole bunch of scientific papers and made contact with a bunch of scientists and asked them some questions about what they were looking into. And so what we've done is we've summarized that information and turned them into some articles on United Baristas to, I guess, help educate the coffee industry about just what their impacts are, but more importantly, how they can actually reduce them in the coming time.
Okay, Tim, look, I was looking at your website the other day and I saw 2 blog posts on there, which sound pretty bleak, to be frank. One of them was...
My website, United Baristas' website isn't bleak. Like, take that back.
Well,
it's full of hope and optimism. Just also maybe some, like, hard truths about where we're at and where we've got to get to.
Well, okay, maybe it's just the headlines which sent a cold shiver down my spine. One of them was how reusable cups can't save the world.
Look, if you didn't take your reusable cup today, like, it's a little bit bad, but like a really, really tiny little bit bad. So, like, we know from some studies that all the emissions that come from the growing and the shipping and the roasting, then the takeout cup component's about 5%. So it's not actually that much at all.
All right, I hear you. Can you tell me then about what we're going to do about all these cups that are just going to, like, sit in landfill?
Well, I guess there's a couple of different things going on with waste, right? So I guess the very first thing to think about is that humans are really good at noticing, like, visual waste. Like, we don't like paper bags on the ground, and we don't like coffee cups on the ground, and we don't like cigarette butts. And so we tend to think of those things first and foremost, which is always when we think about, like, environmental issues, we often think about the things that are, like, often really small and highly visible because those are a part of our day-to-day lives. Like, it's really not great, but also countries have lots of different solutions for dealing with landfill. So some just actually incinerate it and create energy from it. And in terms of, like, the lesser of various evils, which is kind of where we're at with a number of different environmental issues right now, because climate change is so pressing, actually we're primarily interested in what some of the key environmental measures are. How much CO2 does it produce? What's the deforestation impact and how much marine pollution is there? So on all of those fronts, there's often quite a strong sync between the carbon footprint and those other measures as well. So I understand that takeout cups are often littered and that really annoys people, but actually the disposal of them isn't a massive issue.
What you're basically saying is that waste is a problem and it's not something that we should ignore. But the major issue here is CO2 because that's what's contributing to climate change and we need to get a handle on that first.
Climate change is like the number one issue for maybe both the environment but also for humanity. Like, I think one of the things that we often talk about, like, climate change in the abstract, like, oh dear, it'll be really bad, like, when the world ends because of climate change. And we don't actually think through the logical repercussion that actually, like, this is our home. And actually, climate change is really, really bad for humanity.
Okay, I get it. Climate change is attached to the amount of carbon we use. So how do I consume better? What things can I do that are going to make a real difference?
So if you kind of like to take broad brushstrokes, like, say, a flat white or a latte in the UK has a footprint of around about 250 grams of CO2e. And actually...
Well, the weight of 250 grams, like a bag of coffee is 250 grams. That weighs 250 grams.
Yeah, correct. There's like 250 grams of, like, carbon floating around in the atmosphere from when you drink a coffee. Like, it's incredible, in fact.
Wow. I drink what? I don't know, 3-4 cups of coffee a day. I'm making like a kilo of carbon.
It depends what coffee you're actually having, like whether you're having a black coffee or whether you're having a filter coffee or whether you're having a latte. Because actually, like, say, for example, that 250 gram figure, actually around about 2/3 or 3/4 of that is caused through the milk production, the dairy that goes into your cup. So the primary cause of coffee's carbon footprint is actually milk. And there's a whole bunch of things you can do to cut it. So you should probably have a chat with someone who's actually knows all the ins and outs of what the carbon footprint is.
Tim, okay, I hear what you're saying here, but, you know, surely this isn't all about me. It's not all my fault. There must be loads of carbon which is being used to kind of make this crop, you know, to fertilize it, to, like, stick it on a ship. There must be loads of carbon in that. It can't all just be down to me.
Really around about, say, like 25% of a coffee's carbon footprint comes from the coffee growing and from its production origin and from the exporting process, including the shipping to country here. Then around about, say, like 5% or something like that is a result of the roasting of the coffee. By far and away, the biggest point of carbon emissions is the coffee making itself, the electricity used to be able to use a coffee making machine, whether it's an espresso machine or a brewer or something like this. And that's typically over 50% of a coffee's carbon footprint, excluding the milk. Okay. So I think maybe the best way to look at it from my perspective is that the majority of the carbon emissions caused by us, coffee drinkers, and yet actually the key challenges that coffee farmers are facing are caused by climate change, which is a result of our coffee drinking habit. So it really falls to us to be able to make the changes, to be able to reduce coffee's carbon footprint.
Oh, Tim, so I hear what you're saying, but give me like 3 things that I can do to be better so I'm not killing the penguins.
I've seen penguins, by the way. They smell really, really bad.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, there's so much we can do as coffee drinkers. Like, I think the first thing is it's really tempting to overfill your jug at home when you make coffee. So because the electricity required to heat that water is a really significant part of coffee's carbon footprint, you need to fill your jug with just enough water to be able to make your cup of coffee. And of course, that goes for a cup of tea as well. You know, like just boil what you need, no more. When you're buying coffee, it's best to buy coffee that's from a local roaster so that you can actually reduce the carbon emissions from the shipping, or be able to get like shipping with a CO2 neutral delivery company or something like this. Coffee's carbon footprint skyrockets when we start air shipping coffees around the world once they're roasted.
Are you telling me then that I shouldn't be ordering coffee from the Netherlands and from like Australia and Germany? I mean, there's some great roasters out there.
If you want to do that, then I think the challenge falls to you to be able to find other ways within either your coffee drinking habit or within your lifestyle to be able to cut your carbon emissions elsewhere. So I guess for me, importing coffees from foreign roasters is something that I've cut out of my coffee drinking habit, and I don't miss it at all because coffee's so well established that there's really great roasters now in every local market. And so it's a real joy to be able to explore all the coffee roasters from around the country.
Tim, these reusable cups, I mean, I've probably got far too many. They're all different. I mean, some are made of metal, some are made of glass, some are like really flimsy plastic. Which one's better?
So what you can do is scientists can work out the embodied carbon in each of these cups, and so they can work out what the break even is, like how many times would you need to use that cup in order for it to be better than using, say, a takeout cup or a ceramic cup. So a plain plastic coffee cup that's made from like PP plastic, then you're going to need to use that probably like 20, 25 times for it to be better than a paper takeout cup and lid.
That's easy.
What happens is that when you start having cups that are made of like mixed materials, so they're made of, say, plastic and metal, or it's double-walled metal, then actually the number of uses goes up dramatically. So for some of the metal cups that are double-walled, you're talking of uses that are 4, 5, 6, 7, 800 times in order for them to be able to break even with a paper cup. So I think one of the really important things is that if you decide to get a reusable takeout cup, all that carbon has been spent. Like, you have to use it in order to be able to get the environmental benefit. So if you've got one in the back of your cupboard, like, you need to get it out and you need to use it till it's completely spent. Otherwise, you're actually doubling up on your carbon footprint because you've got that reusable cup and you're using takeout cups. Hey, thanks very much, Scott. It's good as always to talk.
Thanks very much. Much appreciated, mate. Take care.
Okay then. You too. Ciao. Bye-bye.
Jools, I don't know how you feel about that interview. I kind of feel both there's a mountain to climb, but we've had some answers.
I kind of feel like I'm edging towards saving the world properly.
For me, there was kind of 3 big takeaways. I mean, the first one is, if you have a reusable cup, just bloody use it. Don't leave it at the back of the cupboard.
Right. Well, we're both guilty of having more than one reusable cup. Are we supposed to be using these things until they're actually like disintegrating in our hands, like they're dead?
Till they're literally leaking in your bag.
No. And I feel kind of cheeky about the way that I was berating you earlier on about this, because I've got 3 that are made of plastic and 1 that's made of cork and glass. So if I do some very quick maths on that, I think I need to use them probably every day for at least the next 2 years before I actually get the carbon back on these bad boys.
Yeah.
You know, the other takeaway that I got from that conversation was about the water. Now, I kick myself because I'm guilty of this as well, but you should only really boil as much water as you need.
Yeah. So the last thing for me, and again, seems really, really obvious, buy local. So, I mean, we always say buy local, but why do we say buy local? Because those transport costs are so carbon intensive.
Now, we have these brilliant takeaways that we got from that conversation that you had, but there is still quite a big elephant in the room, and that is about our milk consumption. So
A big white elephant.
So in your conversation with Tim, he mentioned how big a deal milk is when it comes to coffee's carbon footprint. So I went off and had a chat with Oatly about where the hell all of this carbon actually comes from and what kind of impact switching milks can actually have. So let's cut away from the elephants and cut to that.
Jules, hello.
Hi, Toby. Thanks so much for taking my call today.
Yeah, no problems.
So, Toby, before we jump into the carbon footprint of milk, for the benefit of our listener, would you mind telling us a bit about yourself?
I'm from Cornwall. I'm a Cornish boy. I'm in South London. I've been in and around coffee for nearly 10 years. Everyone at Oatly kind of calls me Mr. Coffee, Mr. Beans.
So, Toby, let's jump into things. Now, Scott had a chat with Tim Ridley and found out that 70% of carbon in a latte comes from just the milk. And, you know, that made me wonder, why is there so much carbon in cow's milk?
Yeah, I mean, the cow is a really inefficient way of taking source grains and then turning them into milk, because the cow's kind of primary use for the food that it consumes is to sustain itself. So what you're doing with livestock is you're growing food for the animal. You're then feeding the animal, and then there's energy lost through kind of the animal surviving and reproducing and growing and kind of wandering around the farm. And then you're looking to extract the calories from the animal. So you have to put a lot into the animal to get very little out. I think it's like for every 100 calories that you put into an animal, you only get about 17 useful calories out. So what Oatly does is kind of shortcut the cow from the system. And by doing that, you remove so much of that carbon within that process. And by removing the cow from the system and replacing it with an Oatly factory, you can cut the amount of carbon litre for litre by around 73% in the UK.
Okay, so I'm still a bit baffled because I just imagine that it's just some grain that's been grown out of the earth that's just going to get put into a cow, like a cow's going to eat it, but then that still results in so much carbon emission. Why would that be the case? Why is there so much from just the cow eating the grain?
So in both instances, for Oatly or for the cow, you're growing grain. And in the growth of that grain, you're generating carbon through the farming process.
Okay, Toby, this might seem like a silly question or a thought that I've got to get out of my head, but I'm just imagining all of these plants, you know, they're growing in the earth, they're doing their thing, and they're taking all of that carbon in, surely. That's a good thing. I'm just trying to imagine how these plants growing up out of the earth are actually spitting the carbon back out.
When you're growing plants at a commercial level, you need all kinds of like fertilizers, and you need to plow the land. And there's all of that machinery, everything that's kind of associated with the actual farming itself. All that creates carbon. And to then take that grain and turn it into oat milk, you don't need anywhere near as much grain as you do to feed to the cow to produce the cow's milk. The other thing with the cow as well is the cow is also producing methane throughout its living life. So that methane is also having a massive impact.
Is the real problem, are we just drilling this down to the fact that cows fart too much as well?
The farting thing is a slight misconception. It's actually their burping. It's the front that you need to be more cautious of.
I just would have assumed it was the emission coming from the back.
It's the fermentation that leads to the burping. There is also methane coming out of the other end, but the majority is coming out of the mouth. Yeah.
All right, so bearing in mind how much of a carbon footprint certain things leave, wouldn't you say that anything that you add to a cup of coffee is going to add more carbon to it? So we should just all be drinking black coffee instead. Like no one should be having any form of milk whatsoever in their coffee and just have it like that. Would that help? Would that solve things?
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that we should just kind of stop consuming everything, but that's not necessarily going to be a solution that works for many people. And I think it's about choice. So the choice is, if you want that kind of the flat white or the cappuccino or the latte, something that is rich and creamy and steamed and comforting, black coffee just doesn't quite hit that same spot. So you can have the choice. You can still have the thing that you're looking for. It just has a much lower climate impact than the original version.
So this leads me to wonder, where can our listener go to figure out the carbon footprint of the milks and the foods they consume?
Yeah, we've done a massive kind of campaign over the last couple of years where we've published our sustainability report and put everything that we do, the good, the bad, the ugly, all into one place for people to read. So for a litre of Oatly, we produce 0.44 kilograms of CO2 equivalent emissions, which is interesting until you then think, like, what does that actually mean? And that's kind of the big issue that we're kind of facing, is that consumers, like you this morning with Scott, you were looking to try and make the most sustainable choice, but you don't necessarily have access to the information that you need at that kind of point of purchase. And I think that's kind of the big thing, is that currently there isn't that transparency, and we're trying to drive forward that transparency with what we're doing around our own kind of carbon labeling on our packs.
All right, Toby, thank you so much for taking the time out to have a chat with me and educating me and our dear listener about this today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Cheers, bye.
Take care. Bye.
Jools,
Scott,
thank you for coming on this journey with me. Before we did this, I couldn't really see the wood for the trees. I knew there was things that I should be doing and things that I could be doing, and I was bombarded with so many marketing messages about what I should do and how, but really, we should be focusing on the easiest things that makes the biggest difference first.
Exactly. Simple steps that we can take are right there in front of us. So, for example, use your reusable cup until it is falling apart. Get the most out of it.
Absolutely. Literally boil as much water as you need.
And buy local. It's right there. You don't have to travel the world in the sense of getting that coffee. It's right on your doorstep. That is a choice you can make.
Absolutely. And if you can go easy on the dairy, then that's a good thing. Switch it up occasionally. You know, I think you said to me once, milk-free Mondays or something like that. Whatever it needs to be.
Just little things like that. And the other thing to take away from this journey as well is that we, the drinkers, we're the ones that are responsible for most of coffee's carbon footprint that's out there, and that ends up affecting the farmers big time. So the more carbon that's produced, the bigger impact that's going to have on climate change, and then in turn that makes life even harder for the coffee farmers. But we as the individuals all have the power to be able to change this, so destiny is quite literally in our hands to make a difference.
Jools.
Oh, yes, Scott.
Is it time for the credits?
I think it is. This podcast was produced by James Harper, the creator of the coffee podcast Filter Stories.
That talented man wrote and also played the piano music. Now, if you want more information, we've put links to Tim Ridley's CO2 articles on United Baristas and Oatly's 2021 sustainability report in the show notes.
Now, if you like the show, please subscribe on your podcast app. You can also help others find the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Castbox.
You can follow Caffeine Magazine on Instagram at Caffeine Mag. You can follow Jools at Lady Velo and James Harper at Filter Stories Podcast.
Oh, and if you show me yours, I'll show you mine. Why don't you send us a picture of your reusable cup collection?
In the next episode, we're tackling the biggest head scratcher of them all, certifications.
Because they have this graded system where you can be not achieving all those goals, but just the bare minimum and get the certificate, or you can be doing a huge amount and get the same certificate. It's hard to say which farms are doing what, where is the most impact taking place.
What do they all mean, and which should you be choosing? Should you choose any of them at all?
I like bird friendly personally.
Certifications are more for middleman than actually like the benefit that can give to the farmer.
You can find out more episodes of the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll speak to you next time.